Katie, thank you so much. She'll be in the main lobby after the service signing autographs, so you can say I knew her when. Growing older for me has had at least one tangible result, and that is that my hair, at least a lot of it, has fallen out. It didn't happen overnight, and those of you who share my malady or whatever it is can attest to that. For me, it began when I was in college. On the crown of my head, it just began over time to become more noticeably thin. With more and more time, what went from thin became barren, and so. But that wasn't that big of a deal, and I still had hair on most places still on my head. I continued at that point. I had a part over here, and I would comb over to the side, and that was fine. But as the years began to pass, though, I went from having a thinning spot to a bald spot here, and then there was a thicker patch, a thinner patch, thicker patch, thinner patch, and finally, Caroline began to say to me, "It's looking like you've got a comb over." Can we just be honest before God and say, comb overs fool no one? They just don't. All right, so guys, that's beauty tip number one. Comb overs fool no one. I've got another one for you in a minute. So Caroline had suggested to me, maybe if you cut it shorter, and then I had some others recommend, if you cut it shorter, it's not that you're going to be fooling anybody, but it'll prevent you from having what appears to be a comb over, may in fact look like you've got a little bit more hair up there. And so the next time I went to get my hair cut, this lady cut, her name was Barb, and so I told her, I said, "Barb, I'm thinking about cutting my hair or getting you to cut my hair short." She said, "I think that'd be a good idea." And so she puts a lower guard on those clippers and she starts shearing me, and it was very short, not nearly as short as it is now, but it was very short. And immediately I thought, though it was a change, it looked better. Caroline really thought that it looked better, and so I continued, and I would go to get a haircut every 3 weeks, and so every 3 weeks I was paying her to do this very simple haircut. And finally Caroline suggested to me, it's not a very complicated haircut. That's something we could do on our own. And so at that point I canceled my next appointment, and we went to Target. I bought some clippers, and since that time I've been cutting my own hair. And that has not been a problem, though there was initially a problem that I experienced because of this. I remember it was on a Saturday morning. I had gotten up and I was going to give myself a haircut. And so I put the right number of guard on there, and I go over my head, and I've done a fine job of cutting my hair. But at this point I need to do something else, which is to shave my neck. Here's beauty tip number 2. Guys, you need to shave your neck. Ladies, you should be saying amen. Thank you. Too many guys go 4 weeks, 6 weeks, 8 weeks in between haircuts, and it looks like they have a cat going to sleep on their shoulders. If you don't cut it every week, at least every other week, it's time to shave your neck. And so anyway, I needed to shave my neck, and I was going to do this on that day like I had done 1,000 times before, which was to get some shaving cream and put it on the back of my neck before I got in the shower. Then I would get in the shower, and then I would feel for my hairline, and I would shave accordingly up to the hairline. And so I get in the shower, and I do that. I'm very satisfied with what feels to be the result, and so that's on Saturday all as well. Sunday morning I get up, and we're getting ready for church, and Caroline comes behind me, and as she comes behind me, she notices something, and she says, you need to look at your neck. What's the matter with that?" I said, "What are you talking about?" She said, "You need to get a mirror. There's spots missing back there." And so I went and got a mirror, and so I'm holding that back and looking in the mirror above the sink in the bathroom. And as I looked at the back of my neck, it appeared as though I had taken the jawbone of a shark to shave my neck with. It was that jagged. I had this big hunk out over here on the left, and all along the bottom, it just looked like that. It was terrible. And so immediately I knew what the problem was, and this was the problem. For years I had shaved my neck like this, but every time I did this before, there was a lot more hair back there for me to feel where it was. Now that the hair was so much shorter, it was difficult to feel where the hairline actually began. And because I was just going by feeling, I made a mess of things. Now, we do a lot of things in life by feeling, don't we? This afternoon, after this service is over and you're preparing for lunch or thinking about what it is that you're going to eat for lunch, most of you are probably not thinking, what would be the most healthy thing that I could consume for lunch? You're probably thinking, what feels good to eat? And when you're beginning to eat, you're not probably asking yourself, what is an appropriate portion that I should have? I mean, you eat until you feel full, and sometimes even beyond that. So many times in terms of relationships, we get into relationships, especially when people are dating, and they're not asking themselves, is this a person that I should be in this type of relationship with? Is this person good for me? They're saying, no, how does this person make me feel? So many times individuals and families wind up in financial difficulty because they're making all sorts of purchases and they're buying more stuff than they need, buying more stuff than they actually have money for, and they're buying these things because it feels good to have that stuff. So much of our lives we spend making decisions that are prompted by, guided by, and directed by how it feels. And in terms of feeling, we're looking for those things that feel pleasurable, those things that are comfortable to us, those things that feel pleasant. And because we're so many times operating based on feeling, we consequently tend to avoid those things that bring us feelings of discomfort, that bring us feelings of pain or angst. We avoid that. And unfortunately, as a result of that, we tend to avoid two things that every single one of us needs, and that's this: guidance and correction. Guidance and correction. And we tend to avoid that because, honestly, does it feel good having somebody say, you're going the wrong way, you need to go this way? Does it feel good to have somebody, a parent, a boss, a spouse, a teacher, someone correct you and say, what you are doing is wrong? No, that doesn't feel good at all. But we need that correction. We need that guidance, though it doesn't feel good. What's interesting is David is one of God's sheep. Not simply one of God's children, but one of his sheep, where the Lord was the true shepherd. As he's reflecting on and counting the blessings that he experiences as one of God's sheep, he says this: your rod and your staff, that's your correction and your guidance. Do you remember what he says? They comfort me. They comfort me. How is it that what doesn't feel good, guidance and correction, being told to do this and not to do that, being told that you're doing wrong and to change that, how can that be a comfort? Well, David understood that it was a comfort when the Lord is your shepherd, to be comforted by his guidance, comforted by his correction. How is that possible? Let me share with you this morning from the 23rd Psalm, then, as we continue working our way through this wonderful, wonderful psalm, two simple reasons how it is that we can experience comfort in this. Here's the first. There is comfort in doing the right things. There is comfort in doing the right things. You are aware, and hopefully you can see in front of you how it is that this psalm begins. And David begins with a series of word pictures, of metaphors, and he says, the Lord is my shepherd. The Lord is my shepherd. And so he's establishing this mental image of him being a sheep and the Lord being his shepherd. And in keeping with that imagery in verse 2, he says that he leads me to lie down in green pastures. He meets the needs that I have. He leads me beside and to drink from still waters. And then in verse 4, he really continues this metaphor to another degree, clearly borrowing words from the world of and from the job of shepherding, where he says, your rod and your staff, they comfort me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. So there's two words there that are noteworthy, and we'll start with the word rod. A shepherd's rod at this point in history was about 2 feet long. Most of the time it was from a tree root, and you probably have either had or do have trees in your yard or have seen trees where roots will begin to, as the tree begins to grow and develop, many of them will come up to the surface. And what would happen at this point in history is that many times they would dig up some of those and cut about a 2-foot section of that tree root. And then they would round one end of it. They would drill a hole into that end. And then through that hole, they would insert a piece of leather or some other type of rope and make a loop around it. And the shepherd would then use this and attach it to his belt as he's doing the work of being a shepherd. Now, there were two primary purposes for which the shepherd would have and use a rod. The first was essentially to use it as a club. Sheep have all sorts of enemies, all sorts of predators love the taste of sheep, and quite frankly, sheep are pretty easy prey. We've talked about before, really the only defenses that they have are good hearing and excellent eyesight with almost panoramic vision. So that's about all that they have going for them. And so consequently, sheep are very often vulnerable targets to wolves and all sorts of other predatory animals. And if a shepherd saw an animal beginning to be threatening or pose a threat to his sheep, he may take that rod and he would go and launch an assault against that animal, maybe clubbing it over the head to the point where he would kill it, but at least drive it away from the flock. And so a shepherd may use this to protect his sheep. But I don't think that's the purpose for which David is describing and thanking and relishing the comfort he experiences in describing the Lord's rod. Because there was another purpose, and I think this is the one that David had in mind. When I began this series, the 23rd Psalm, I didn't know very much about sheep at all. And I have heard, as probably many of you have heard, that sheep are not very bright animals. They tend to be quite dumb. And though we have been cultured to think that, the truth is they're not really unintelligent animals. Sheep tend to be actually fairly smart animals. Now, one of the reasons that they have been thought to be dumb is, among other things, that they have this really strong herding or flocking instinct, and they want to stay together. Well, but that's pretty smart. They have no horns, they don't have sharp teeth, they don't have small weapons to be able to defend themselves because they have no thumbs, right? And so they have no defenses, and really the only safety that they can experience is in the herd, in their safety in numbers. And so they have this strong flocking instinct, but as they do so, sheep tend to follow the dominant sheep. So that there's going to be a dominant sheep in every herd or in every flock of sheep, and they're going to follow him. And they're going to follow him doggedly. Wherever he goes, they're going to want to follow. And sheep have oftentimes been thought to be dumb or foolish because of this. But they're just wanting to stay together. And if one seems like he knows what should be going on, they're just going to kind of follow it. Well, they're going to be flocking and herding together, following this dominant sheep. But where that sheep is leading them may be at odds from where the shepherd wants to lead them. And so when that happens, the shepherd wants to redirect and rechart the course of his sheep. And trying to get them to change course is oftentimes difficult because though they are not actually dumb animals, they are stubborn animals. And typically what a shepherd would do is to begin by verbal expressions to try to coax them. And he would say something to them. I don't know if he would name them or he would just say, this is my favorite joke. You. That's E-W-E. But he might try to verbally coax them and say something to try to get them to come to follow him. Or if they're still going the opposite direction, he may try to get in front of them and physically block the direction that they're seeking to go. But when that doesn't work, what the shepherd is going to do is to deal with that dominant sheep. And he's going to go to that sheep and he's going to take that rod off and he is going to actually strike that animal. And he's going to do so for two reasons. One, to get that animal's attention, but that's not the ultimate purpose. The ultimate purpose is to change that sheep's behavior. It's interesting, it tends to start off far more gentle, and when that doesn't work, it continues to progress in terms of severity. It's interesting that God, I believe, works the same way. God doesn't immediately grab the rod. I believe God seeks to, first of all, through the power of His Spirit, convict us. He may bring others alongside of us to help us to see what we have become effectively oblivious to. But when that doesn't work, God continues to up the ante in terms of His response, not simply to get our attention, but ultimately to change our behavior. And so when David is talking about this rod of God, he is talking about God's corrective or God's disciplinary measures. But isn't it interesting how David phrases this? He says of God's rod, it comforts him. It comforts him. When I was growing up, my parents would use a belt, a paddle, a spoon, whatever was available. And yes. And so that's what we would get spanked with. And we weren't beat, but we were spanked. And there's all the difference in the world. If you don't know that and understand that, see me afterwards and I'll show you how it works. But anyway, but that they would use whatever was available. But of that belt, I never said, it comforts me. I never said of that wooden spoon or of that switch off of a Yellow Bell, that comforts me. Isn't it interesting? He says of God's corrective disciplinary action, it comforts him. Now, do you think David had a screw loose and somehow he enjoyed that which is unpleasant or that which is negatively consequential? I don't think that was it at all. Well, how is it then that he could say that God's correction was a comfort to him? Well, because of this fact. David came to understand and recognize that there is comfort in knowing that you're doing the right thing and comfort to be found in doing the right thing. He came to understand that there's comfort in knowing and in doing the right thing. There is comfort in that. But he also understood this: I will never do the right thing, or at least consistently do the right thing, without being corrected. My entire ministry, as I have been preaching, sincerely, I have sought to do my absolute best when I prepare and I deliver a message. And that doesn't mean that every message has been spectacular, though I'm sure you think that they are. That one was free. Anyway, sincerely, I seek to do my absolute best, both in preparation and in delivery of every message that I have an opportunity to share. Now, I do that for a couple of reasons. First of all, I think you deserve that. You deserve people that are serving the Lord and serving you, giving their absolute best. But far beyond you, I believe that the Lord deserves my absolute best. And so both in preparation and delivery, I seek to do my best. That being said, though, I'm aware that not every message has been a home run. And every message after I have finished, I am mentally evaluating how that went. Whether what I said was kind of in keeping with what I'd planned, or if I butchered something, what could I do different? What could I do better next time? What can I do differently or better next week? And so I tend to be a good evaluator of my own preaching. That being said, the greatest evaluator of my preaching is not me. My greatest evaluator of my preaching is not you collectively or individually. My greatest evaluator is Caroline. From Caroline, I get the plain, unadulterated, unvarnished truth. And if it's wonderful, she'll say that was great. If it stinks, she's going to let me know I stunk up the joint. So I remember one particular sermon, though, a number of years ago I was preaching, and it was on an episode in the life of Joseph. And if you remember the story of Joseph, you remember early on one of the key themes is favoritism, because he was the favored son of his father Jacob, because he was the miracle child of Jacob's favorite wife, Rachel. And so after this particular message on favoritism, I was thinking, that was pretty good. That was good preaching. And so I'm feeling really good about the message until after the service I'm talking to Caroline, and she says, you need to get the CD. I said, why? She said, if you said favorite wife or favorite son or favorite anything once, you said it 10,000 times. It was favorite, 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 favorite. It's like favorite was your favorite word in that favorite message. And as soon as she said that, I started thinking back through that message, and I thought, you know what? She's right. I did say that over and over again. She said, but you need to get the CD and listen to it. I said, no, you're right. I did say that over and over again. I don't need to listen to the CD. And she said, oh, yes, you do. If we had to listen to it, you've got to listen to it. So I listened to that favorite sermon. And ever since then, I can't say that, again, every message has been a home run, but I can tell you this. I haven't picked one word and repeated it over and over and over and over again. That hasn't happened. Why? Because of Caroline's corrective action. We only do and consistently do the right thing when there is correction. And David understood this, and it's not that he took delight in or found pleasure in God saying that is wrong, or God bringing circumstances to bear, or people into his life to confront him with what it was that he was doing. It wasn't that there was delight or joy that put a smile on his face. There's no comfort to be found in that. But David knew that that was necessary if he was ever going to be knowing and doing the right thing. And in that's where he found his comfort. Why? Because there is comfort in knowing and in doing the right thing. Listen, God wants you thinking, doing, saying, behaving, operating, responding, acting, and reacting in the right ways. And He understands, and thankfully David came at this point to understand, and hopefully God is working through this to bring you to the point of understanding that the only way that He can ever get you on the right path and stay on the right path is to bring corrective measures into your life. And He does this, why? Because you are His child. He does this because you are His sheep. He doesn't do this to everyone. What does the Bible tell us? That God chastens those that He loves as dear children. Did your parents go and ground or spank the kids down the street? No, because that wasn't their child. They correct what is their own. God corrects those that are His own because there is great comfort in doing the right thing. David said of the Lord's rod, "It comforts me." There's comfort to be found in doing the right thing. But he also describes that there's comfort to be found in God's staff. That, of course, is a reference to God's guidance. And why was he saying this? Well, because there is comfort to be found in going the right direction. There's comfort in going the right direction. Odds are when you think of a shepherd, or at least try to come up with a mental image of a shepherd, you probably imagine somebody in a pretty drab-colored robe of some sort, some type of sash or rope around their waist. But if you don't picture anything else, you're going to picture them standing there with this big long staff that's got a crook in it. In fact, the shepherd's crook is essentially the trademark image of the whole world of and the task of shepherding. And the shepherd's staff was a very important and valuable resource, and shepherds would use them in a couple of different ways. One of the ways that they would use them is to, at night, when they're seeking to corral the sheep and bringing them in, what he would do is to turn that crook or turn the staff so that the crook faces outward, and as the sheep would come by, he would kind of use that as a mental marker or a visual marker. So as they pass under, that's 1, that's 2, that's 3, and counting the sheep to make sure that all of them get into the corral, to make sure that all of them are accounted for. And if 1 or 2 or 10 are missing, let's go out and go and find them. But there was another more primary benefit for which the shepherd would use his staff. And that is that if you had a little small young lamb and it were seeking to get away from the flock, or it's not staying up, or it's gone over to graze in this area while the rest of the sheep are going in that direction, the shepherd may try to coax it. If that doesn't work, he's going to use that staff and put it crook outward and come along and scoop underneath and grab the abdomen of that sheep and physically pull it and get it back going the right direction, the direction that the shepherd wants them to go, the direction he wants the rest of the sheep to go. Now, that's what he would do with young lambs, but you can't do that with an adult sheep because their abdomen is so big. And so at that point, he would use the crook of that staff to literally get them around the neck, towards the base of the neck, and physically redirect their head as to where it is that they are going. Because, again, sheep are going to be headed some direction, but they may not be headed in the direction that the shepherd wants them to go. Why is he going to seek to guide them? Well, because the shepherd knows where the dangers are. He knows that there may be predatory animals in this particular area, or he may know that this area ends essentially at a cliff. We need to head back a different direction. Beyond that, he knows where the good things are, where the good pasture land is for grazing. He knows where the still waters are for these sheep to be able to drink. And he says of the Lord, metaphorically here, that's what he does for me. He uses things to pull me, to tug me, to get me going in the right direction. Well, again, this is clearly a metaphor. There's not some giant hook that you see coming down out of heaven that's going to physically grab you. So how does this work? Well, there's a number of resources that God has at His disposal. The two primary ones that He uses are His Word and His Spirit. And so in the pages of God's Word, we find all of these parameters and boundaries that are established of behaviors that are appropriate and things that are not, things that are praiseworthy to pursue and things that should be avoided. But the truth is, the Bible doesn't deal with every single minute detail of our lives and of our choices and of the options that are out before us. And so where the Bible may be silent on some of these issues, God, through the person of His Spirit, speaks to us and says, you should go this way, not that. Stay away from this, pursue that. So His primary resources are His Word and His Spirit. But beyond that, God uses other things. Oftentimes, God uses circumstances. Sometimes He uses circumstances that are negative to help show us or to confirm to us the direction you're going, that's the wrong way. Sometimes He uses positive circumstances to confirm, essentially as a pat on the back, this is the right way to go. Keep at it. Keep going in this direction. Sometimes He uses other people. Sometimes it's someone that's close to you, like a spouse, a parent. It could be a classmate, somebody you go to church with, a Sunday school teacher, a preacher. God could use a perfect stranger. He can use someone that's saved. He can use someone that's lost. God can use and does use people in a variety of different ways to show us the exacting way that He wants us to go, to show us the paths that we should take and consequently show us those that we shouldn't be going down. But let me ask you this. A moment ago, we talked about how it doesn't feel good to have somebody say, you are wrong, what you are doing is wrong, that there's no pleasure, there's no comfort to be found in that. How many of you like somebody saying, well, this is what you need to do? This is the direction that you need to go. I mean, teenagers get so frustrated with their parents because they're constantly doing that. You don't like your boss constantly telling you this is what you need to do. How is it then that David describes God's guidance as being a comfort to him? Because as he understood with correction, he understood with guidance that there is comfort to be found in going the right direction. This past summer, somebody had shared with Caroline about having gone to Hanging Rock State Park over on the other side of Winston and talked about how there's waterfalls and trails and all sorts of stuff over there. And after that, Caroline went and looked it up online, and she sees, that this would be probably something that the boys in particular would really enjoy. This would be a good family outing for us. She tells me about it, and there's no cost in this apart from the gas to get over there. So we pick a particular Friday that we're going to take the kids over to Hanging Rock. So that Friday morning, we get up and we get ready and we get the kids' clothes on. We're going to be having a picnic lunch there, and so we get the lunch prepared, put that in the cooler. We're low on beer, so we had to stop at the grocery store, and the kids, they're really thirsty. Anyway, but we get the van loaded up, and we get in, and we're ready to take off to head to Hanging Rock, and we're getting ready to pull out of the driveway, but there's a problem. I don't know how to get there. I know it's somewhere around Winston. I know how to get to Winston, but there's a lot of stuff that's kind of around Winston. So how exactly do we get there? That's a problem. But the truth is, it wasn't really a problem, because before we left the driveway, I got my GPS unit out and I plugged it in. I typed in an address. I said go, set it up on the dash, and all of a sudden, it's telling me turn-by-turn directions. I didn't have to know anything. Long before I even see an intersection, I can see it on this screen and whether I should turn right or go straight. I mean, there was no guesswork. It wasn't one of those instances where you're driving along and you think, well, it feels like we should have turned by now. Do you think we missed it, or should we keep on going? There was none of that. It was just getting in, following the directions, and getting there. Man, there's great comfort in that. I didn't have to worry about whether I've missed a turn, whether we've gone too far, how much longer to get there. I knew all of that. And it was such a blessing. Why? Because there is absolute, genuine comfort in going and knowing that you're going the right direction. That's what David's talking about when he references God's guidance, that it is a blessing to him. He counts it as a blessing because not only is there comfort to be found in doing the right things, but there's comfort to be found in going the right direction. And he says, that's what God does for me. He guides me through His Word, through His Spirit, through people, through circumstances, through the experiences of life. God guides me, showing me the path that I should go. And there's comfort to be found in that. Maybe you're here this morning and you think, that really is. I can see that's absolutely a blessing. Wish I'd thought about that a few years ago. Wish I'd thought about that before I made this particular decision. That I moved to that city or took this job or began to date that person. Before I bought this or signed up for that. I wish I had known it then. Maybe then I wouldn't be on this path. Because I feel like I'm stuck on a dead-end road. One of the things that's comforting about God's guidance is that in many ways it works like GPS. If you have one or have ever used one, you probably have missed a turn. You weren't paying enough attention. You're supposed to turn right and you missed that turn. You know what the GPS unit does after that? It recalculates. Now, you may have to kind of go around your elbow. You're going to have to go a bit out of the way. The ride may take longer. It may be on a less scenic route. You may be dealing with more traffic and congestion. But it reroutes you so that you can ultimately still get to the destination. Thankfully, when you or I or any of God's sheep make a mistake and we fail and we miss the turn that God wants us to make, God doesn't say, that's it, done with them. He recalculates and seeks to give you a new path to get to the destination that He knows is best, guiding you along the way. And because of that, man, you can find great comfort and count it a genuine blessing. Why? Because there's comfort to be found in going the right direction. I want you to understand today that God does not want you miserable as one of His children. That's not His primary goal. He really does want you to experience and feel the blessing of being in a relationship with Him. He wants you doing the right things and feeling good about it. He wants you headed in the right direction and feeling good about it. But that only happens, that only occurs when you respond to His correction and when you respond to His guidance. This morning and throughout this series, we've been talking about blessings, counting blessings that we experience as God's sheep. Some of you here this morning, perhaps if you're honest, just between you and God, you may not feel comfortable in saying this to even those that are closest to you in life. But you may say before God, you know what? This whole correction and this whole guidance thing, I've never felt that. I've never felt that. Why do you think that is? Let me tell you the reason that is. God guides and God corrects His sheep. If you never feel God's correction, if you can thumb your nose at heaven and do your own thing and go your own path, and there is never any corrective measure, there is never any discipline to try to gain your attention or change your behavior, to alter the path that you're on, well, it's because you're not one of God's sheep. Are you okay with that? God doesn't want you to be that way. He wants you in the fold. He wants you in the family. Just a moment, we're going to have a time of decision. And for you, you can make that decision to become one of His sheep, to become one of His children. But maybe you're here today and you say, well, Michael, I have already made that decision. I'm part of the family and part of the fold. But this whole idea of comfort and guidance and comfort and correction, I don't feel that. What I feel right now is misery. Because this correction stuff stinks. Being told that I'm wrong is lousy. Being told that I'm going the wrong direction, that doesn't feel good. I find no comfort in it. Do you know why? Because you're still headed in the wrong direction. The comfort finds, and the comfort is experienced when you begin once again to follow the direction of the shepherd. David says of the Lord, He is not only my shepherd, but as my shepherd, I find comfort in His rod and in His staff, in His correction and in His guidance. Can you say that today? Won't you bow your heads with me?